My name is Cassandra Vale, and I'm 48 years old. That night, when the gold-trimmed invitation slid through my apartment door, I should have known better, but I opened it anyway, like a fool hoping fire had turned to warmth. It was from her, Elise Carrington, my former sister-in-law, queen of high society luncheons and diamond-studded cruelty. The envelope smelled like rosewater and old money. Inside was an invitation to the annual Carrington Family Unity Dinner, hosted at the Langford estate. Formal attire required, attendance deeply encouraged. I stood there in my modest kitchen, cheap linoleum under my bare feet, staring at those words like they were a slap wrapped in silk. I hadn't spoken to Elise in nearly a year. Not since Peter, her brother, my ex-husband, walked out of our marriage and into the arms of some 26-year-old model/motivational speaker. Elise never offered comfort. Instead, she'd posted a cryptic quote on Instagram that same week. Sometimes subtraction is addition. That's how she saw me, an equation to erase. So why the invitation now? A part of me, the part still aching from betrayal and abandonment, thought maybe this was her way of extending an olive branch. Another part, the one that had endured 10 years of backhanded compliments and glassy-eyed insults, knew it was bait. And still, I went. I borrowed a dress from my friend Marla. Emerald green silk, elegant and simple, hugging my curves in a way that reminded me I hadn't disappeared. Not really. I spent hours curling my hair, brushing on foundation, convincing myself I belonged. The Langford estate was everything I remembered: towering gates, marble statues, hedges shaped like swans, a home so immaculate it made people feel dirty just walking in. As I stepped out of the Uber, the air changed, colder, thinner, like money itself had altitude. I was greeted at the door by one of Elise's staff. She looked me up and down, not cruelly, but clinically, as if checking if I passed inspection. She offered no compliment, no smile, just a nod and the word, "This way." Inside, the chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars. The dining hall stretched endlessly, white roses spilling from glass vases at every turn. Guests already milled about, laughing with champagne flutes in hand, their jewelry catching the light like paparazzi flashes. Then I saw her. Elise descended the staircase like a queen, no, like a goddess. Her dress was a liquid gold sheath that clung to her surgically perfect figure. Her blonde hair swept over one shoulder like it had been painted into place. Around her neck hung a necklace I recognized, a Carrington family heirloom, once promised to Peter's wife. Once promised to me. Her eyes locked onto mine and lit up not with warmth but triumph. "Well," she said, sauntering over, "look who finally decided to emerge from the shadows." I managed a tight smile. "Thank you for the invitation." She sipped her drink, not offering one in return, of course. "It's a family event, and well, you were part of the family once." There it was, the first cut of the night. I turned to glance at the table, a long stretch of white linen, each seat adorned with name cards written in ornate calligraphy. I searched for mine, left to right, nothing. "Oh," Elise said, her voice dripping with innocent cruelty. "Did no one tell you? We only had 20 seats this year. Limited space, but you're welcome to stand for the toast." Laughter fluttered from behind her, soft and poisonous. A few of her friends, the ones who used to nod politely when I was still Mrs. Peter Carrington, now avoided my eyes like I was contagious. I felt my throat tighten, heat rushing to my cheeks, but I swallowed it down. I wasn't going to let her win. I walked toward the far end of the table, where a seat was still open, probably someone's late arrival. I pulled it out, hoping to disappear into the crowd, when she clinked her glass. "Everyone," she said, voice rising, "before dinner begins, I just want to say how grateful I am to be surrounded by such accomplished people. Real contributors, real elegance. Not everyone gets to sit at a table like this." I froze, half sitting. "And," she continued, her eyes on me like a hawk circling prey, "in the spirit of generosity, I invited a special guest. A reminder that success isn't always inherited, sometimes it's just observed from afar." There were murmurs, chuckles, a few glances my way. I'm talking, of course, about our dear family Pauper. The room went silent. My heart thudded like a war drum. I stood fully now, face burning, stomach sinking, breath tight. Elise lifted her glass toward me in mock salute. "Don't worry, everyone, she's just here for the ambience. After all, what's a charity event without a little charity?" The insult landed like a slap, and before I could respond, before I could even think, she waved toward the entry. "Security," she said sweetly. I think one of our guests wandered in without a place card. 2 guards stepped forward, like they'd been waiting for the cue all night. "No," I whispered, "you can't be serious." "Oh, Cass," she said, stepping closer, her voice low and gleeful. "You should have stayed in the shadows. That's where broken things belong." People stared, their expressions a mix of discomfort, pity, and silent agreement. And just like that, I was escorted out. Not one person stopped it. Not even Peter. He sat across the table beside his new girlfriend, jaw clenched, eyes on his wine. Outside, I stood alone in the winter air, heels sinking into the gravel, fingers trembling, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg for a sliver of dignity. I stood there, heart in pieces, pride in ashes, and I promised myself she would regret it. Not today, not tomorrow, but when I returned, I wouldn't come with tears. I'd come with power, and I would make her watch as everything she mocked me for became the very thing that undid her. The sound of the estate's heavy doors slamming shut behind me echoed louder in my memory than they did in that moment. Outside, the wind cut like glass through my dress, and the warmth I'd so carefully wrapped around myself, hope, dignity, effort, was stripped away with every stare I imagined watching from behind those grand windows. I didn't cry, not then, but not because I wasn't hurt. It was because I was burning. I walked back down the stone path toward the driveway, each step harder than the last, heels catching in the gravel like the night itself was trying to stop me from leaving. I reached the gate just as another valet was arriving, eyes wide at the sight of me without a coat, without a car, without a place. I didn't say a word. I didn't owe anyone one. When I finally got home, past midnight, in a borrowed dress and aching feet, I sat on the floor of my apartment and tried to breathe. The silence pressed down on me harder than Eliza's words, because as cruel as she'd been, she had done something much worse than insult me. She had made me invisible, even when she called me the family pauper. No one stepped in, not Peter, not a cousin, not one of the fakes, smiling women who used to text me for recipes or skincare tips when I was still Mrs. Carrington. They all just watched like I was a show, like I was nothing, but I wasn't. I was angry. I was hurt, yes, humiliated, absolutely. But underneath it all, under the shame and the broken pride, there was something rising in me. Something Elise had never expected. She wanted me to feel small, discarded, humiliated so badly I'd never show my face again. And for a while, I let her think she'd succeeded. The days after the dinner were quiet. I stopped replying to texts. What few came in, I didn't post anything. I skipped Marla's invitation to brunch. I even turned down a freelance project, something I would normally have taken just to keep the lights on. I needed time to sit with the pain, time to relive every second of that moment. Her voice, the laughter, the feel of 2 security guards gently but firmly escorting me out like I was trash in heels. And then I needed to decide what to do with that pain. I could have moved on, left town, started fresh somewhere no one knew the Carrington name. No one would ever use the word pauper like a dagger, but if I did that, she'd win. And I didn't survive the collapse of my marriage, the loss of my home, the gutting of my savings, just to hand over the last thing I had left, my self-respect. So I started digging, not out of revenge at first. Not really. I needed to know why she hated me so much, why she went so far as to publicly rip me to shreds in a room full of people. Yes, she always looked down on me. I was the scholarship girl from the working-class side of town who somehow married her brother and wormed her way into their marble world. I'd never been one of them, but her cruelty had escalated beyond class snobbery. It felt personal. I started pulling threads. Quietly, I went through old emails, bank statements Peter left behind. I asked questions I hadn't before, and while I did that, Elise reveled. She threw another party 2 weeks later, some high society brunch for a charity that spent more money on catering than it did on the cause. The photos were everywhere, her laughing in pearls. My name wasn't mentioned, but her caption said it all. Surround yourself with people who lift you up, not drag you down. And still, no one asked about me, not the family, not the friends. Even Peter, spineless as he'd always been, remained a silent shadow. Let them forget me, because what they didn't know was that I had stopped surviving and started planning. A month passed, then two. I still hadn't returned to any social events. The city assumed I'd had some kind of breakdown, the way women are always labeled when they refuse to smile through public humiliation. I even saw a Reddit thread about that Carrington dinner, mostly speculation and gossip. But the silence worked in my favor, because while allies wore designer gowns and posted inspirational quotes, I was learning things she never wanted me to know. I learned who her silent business partner was, how her interior design company was funded, where the money really came from, and I learned something even better, what she couldn't afford to lose. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before I made any moves, before I set my plan in motion, I had to understand something deeper. Why did she humiliate me that night? Why did she call me the pauper in front of everyone? It wasn't about money, not really. It was about control. Allies had spent years making me feel like I didn't belong. Like Peter only married me out of rebellion, like I was the stain on their silk. When he finally left, she thought the stain had been removed, and when I showed up at that dinner, dressed with pride, standing tall, I reminded her she hadn't won. So she did what cruel people do when they feel their power slipping. She made a spectacle. She wanted to break me publicly so I wouldn't dare rise again. She wanted the world to see me as worthless so no one would ever take me seriously again. She wanted the last word, but she forgot something about people like me. People who have had to fight for every inch of space, people who have known hunger, people who have had to fix their own broken lives without luxury to soften the blows. She forgot that when we rise with fire. So I stayed silent. I watched, I waited, and in that silence I promised myself something. I wouldn't just get even. I would take everything she built on cruelty and make her watch it fall. No one heard from me for months, and that was exactly how I wanted it. After allies publicly humiliated me at that dinner, the city's high society circled its wagons. Gossip floated through brunches and spa lounges like perfume. Some said I'd moved away, too ashamed to show my face. Others insisted I'd checked into a mental health retreat. A few, whispering over cocktails, claimed Peter had paid me off to disappear quietly. None of it was true. But I let the lies breathe, I let them talk, I let them erase me, because while they were polishing champagne flutes and toasting to their cruelty, I was working in silence, not hiding, not recovering, but building something beneath the surface. The first thing I did was get out of the apartment I had moved into after the divorce. That place was filled with echoes, memories of phone calls with Peter, nights I cried in the kitchen trying to scrape meals together when our finances were collapsing. So I packed 2 suitcases, paid off my last month with cash, and vanished like smoke. No forwarding address, no online trace. I rented a room in a quiet corner of town, one of those forgotten old Victorian homes chopped into tiny flats. The kind where the walls creak at night and the hot water is temperamental, but it was mine. There was something sacred about the anonymity of it. No doorman, no socialite neighbors, no mirrors reflecting back who I used to be. I spent my mornings in coffee shops, hoodie pulled low, scribbling notes into my planner. I mapped timelines. I researched her business interests. I combed through archives and scanned years of press releases, sponsorship deals, and digital footprints that allies probably thought had long since faded. What they didn't know was that beneath every scandalous photo and designer label was a woman standing on a foundation of lies. And I was going to find the cracks. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness. I'd made peace with that. It was the silence, the urge to tell someone, to scream that I wasn't broken, that I hadn't disappeared in shame but in strategy, haunted me every night. But this plan required patience, and silence is where real revenge takes root. About 6 weeks into my disappearance, I started forming alliances, quiet ones. First was Lena, a former assistant of Eliza's I remembered meeting once during a holiday gala. She had left abruptly, no explanation given. I tracked her down through an old mutual friend and offered to buy her lunch. She was hesitant at first, eyes scanning the cafe like she expected Eliza to burst through the doors and ruin her life again. "She's not just a narcissist," Lena said between sips of coffee. "She's dangerous, vindictive. She'll destroy you if she thinks you've seen too much." I looked her dead in the eye, good, because I want her to know I saw everything. It took time, but eventually Lena opened up. Not everything, but enough. Enough to point me in the direction of where Eliza's money really came from, and more importantly, how fragile her empire was behind the glossy Instagram curtain. I spent the next month connecting Eliza's investors, board members, business filings, even anonymous whistleblower complaints buried deep in charity records. I was uncovering rot beneath the marble floors, and every discovery made the humiliation I'd endured feel more like fuel than shame. But the real breakthrough came by accident. I was scrolling through archived footage from a local TV segment Eliza had appeared in years ago, trying to piece together a timeline of her rise, when I noticed a blurred name on a check in the background, one of her early donors. The name rang a bell. I followed the thread and landed on a bankruptcy case filed just a year before that appearance. It didn't make sense. How could someone bankrupt fund Eliza's foundation? Unless the donor name was fake. A shell. I called in a favor from an old friend of mine who worked in corporate law. We'd lost touch after the divorce, but when I told her I needed a background check run, off the record, she didn't ask questions. What she found made my blood go cold. There were 3 such names linked to Eliza's charity. All had shady financials. All were quietly shut down or absorbed, and all were on paper, owned by Offshore LLC, tracing back to one mysterious entity. You guessed it, Eliza. It hit me then that she wasn't just a socialite with a mean streak. She was laundering money through her own nonprofit, and if I could prove it, I wouldn't just humiliate her, I could destroy her. But I needed more than a pattern. I needed proof, real, hard, irrefutable proof, so I went quiet again. The next few weeks were a blur of screenshots, late-night calls, and encrypted messages. I installed secure software. I learned more about financial fraud than I ever wanted to know. I built a file, a real one this time, not just rage and heartbreak, but facts, dates, documents, names, screen captures, transactions. It was terrifying and thrilling at once. Eliza thought I was broken, but I was evolving. She was out there planning her next gala, draped in silk, pretending her empire was built on taste and talent. Meanwhile, I had already started drafting the script for her fall. And the best part, she still had no idea I was coming. I stayed away from social media, changed phone numbers, moved apartments again. This time into a sleek little space I could afford because of a freelance gig I picked up from a PR firm whose CEO hated Eliza with a quiet, dangerous kind of passion. Funny how many people are willing to help you when you're not the one standing in the spotlight. They all think she's untouchable, that her wealth protects her, that her last name grants her immunity. But the thing about powerful people is this: they never think the ones they step on will rise. And Eliza, she didn't just step on me, she tried to crush me, which meant I wasn't just coming back to prove her wrong. I was coming back to end her reign, and no one, not Peter, not the family, not the city's elite, would see it coming. The thing about predators like Eliza is they never imagine being hunted. They strut through life with blood on their hands and a diamond smile on their face, confident that no one will ever look too closely. People like her hide behind designer gowns and charity galas, thinking that glamour makes them untouchable. But I had already seen what was under her sill, crotting lies and the bones of people she'd used up and thrown away. And now I wasn't just one of them. I was the one digging up her skeletons, and I was getting close. It started with a flash drive. Lena, Eliza's former assistant, handed it to me one rainy evening in a parking lot. No hugs, no eye contact, just a handoff between 2 women who'd been burned by the same fire. She used my name, Lena whispered, her voice barely audible under the sound of thunder overhead, to open a shell account I didn't even know until the IRS flagged me. My heart thudded, The flash drive was encrypted. I had to pay a tech guy $300 and swear on my life that I wouldn't ask questions just to get into it. What I found was more than I expected, more than I was ready for, years of financial spreadsheets, internal memos, fund transfers that made no sense. But what struck me hardest were the signatures, forged, dozens of them. Eli's had been using identities of former employees, silent investors, even distant relatives to move money into offshore accounts. The charities she claimed were building schools in underdeveloped countries. They were empty shells, fake invoices, fake vendors, fake humanitarian projects, and the anonymous donors she thanked in every speech. Most of them were herself, laundering money through aliases. The empire she built wasn't made of gold, it was made of sand, and one good storm would bring it crashing down. But I needed more. I didn't just want a scandal, I wanted devastation. I wanted irrefutable, televised, career-ending proof, something she couldn't wiggle out of with crocodile tears and a PR team. That's when I remembered Andre. He was Peter's old college friend, tall, charming, and smarter than he let on. He ran a boutique financial auditing firm that big, named charities sometimes used to keep their books clean. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the divorce, but I knew he never liked Eli's. In fact, I remembered overhearing a drunken toast at our wedding where he called her a power, hungry black hole in Louboutin heels. I reached out anonymously at first, through a burner email, pretending to be a journalist working on a charity fraud expose. I gave him just enough details to pique his interest. When he agreed to meet for coffee, I showed up in person. He blinked when he saw me. "You're the journalist. I'm the woman she tried to erase," I said, sliding the flash drive across the table. He didn't need convincing after that. Andre started reviewing her documents quietly, off the record. What he found shocked even him. Eli's wasn't just misappropriating funds. She was funneling money into political campaigns, luxury real estate, and private cryptocurrency portfolios through a maze of international loopholes. "It's criminal," he whispered one night, eyes glued to the screen. "If this goes public, she won't survive it." Good, I thought, but I said nothing. I simply nodded and kept my hands steady. While Andre built the case, I worked on the narrative. Because if there's one thing Eli's taught me, it's that optics matter. If you want to destroy someone like her, you don't just leak documents. You craft the story so perfectly that the world gasps when the curtain falls. So I hired a discreet media consultant. Not one of those glittery PR firms with bright offices downtown, but a former investigative producer from a canceled news show who now worked from home and carried a grudge against rich frauds. He helped me time everything, script everything, down to the second. We agreed on a date, Eliza's upcoming live charity gala, her biggest event of the year, celebrity guests, press coverage, broadcast live to millions. She'd spent months preparing it, thinking it was her coronation. She had no idea it would become her funeral, but the best part, she didn't even know I was watching. I had scrubbed myself so clean from her world that I was invisible now, and invisibility was power. It meant I could plant landmines around her feet while she smiled for the cameras. It meant I could burn her castle down without ever stepping inside. One night, I drove by her estate. I parked 2 blocks away, hidden behind tall hedges, just to look. The lights were on in every room. Catering trucks lined the street. A team of decorators carried floral arches and golden tablecloths through the front gates. And there she was, Eli's, laughing in her driveway, champagne in hand, telling a crewman to adjust the lighting on the front entrance. "I need to shine," she said, tossing her hair like the Queen of Versailles. She had no idea the guillotine was already in place. Watching her in that moment, I felt nothing, no rage, no bitterness. Only certainty. She thought she'd buried me, but I had risen beneath her feet, and soon the whole world would know exactly what she'd done. There's a moment in every storm where the wind goes quiet, just long enough for you to realize everything is about to change. That moment hit me when Andre called. "She's trying to sell," he said, voice tight with urgency. "The Magnolia Foundation headquarters. She's desperate. Quiet deal. Private buyers only." I froze. The Magnolia Foundation wasn't just another fake charity under Eliza's empire. It was her crown jewel. It had her name on the board, her face in every magazine ad, her blood-red gowns on every step, and, repeat banner, it was her identity, her brand, her pride. Every socialite who whispered her name in admiration pointed to Magnolia as proof that she wasn't just rich, she was respected. If I could take it from her without her knowing, I could shatter the image before the truth even dropped, but the building wasn't cheap. A three-story restored colonial mansion downtown, laced with marble staircases and Swarovski chandeliers in every meeting room. It had been appraised at just over $12 million. I didn't have $12 million. What I did have was leverage, timing, and 3 years' worth of careful, quiet moves. When I disappeared after the humiliation, I didn't just hide out of shame. I rebuilt my financial life. I took consulting gigs under aliases, invested in small companies, partnered with quiet entrepreneurs who didn't want attention but needed brains, real estate, e-commerce, even crypto. I didn't flash $1 of it on social media or tell a soul in my family. Not even Peter knew. Everything I'd earned sat in offshore accounts and silent partnership, waiting for this moment. Still, I couldn't do it alone, so I made a call to a woman named Blair Kincaid. Blair was the kind of buyer who didn't care about legacies, only margins. She ran a luxury co-working startup that targeted socially conscious tech companies. Magnolia's mansion was perfect for her next expansion. I told her I'd fund half the deal if she bought it in her name with the option for me to acquire full ownership in 6 months. She didn't blink. "I like revenge," she said, signing the paperwork without asking another question. The sale went through in under 3 weeks, and Allies had no idea I was behind it. The only thing she noticed was that a mystery buyer had paid above asking price. In cash, I waited until the ink dried, until her accounts reflected the transfer, until the building's exterior changed from her signature emerald green banners to a clean, modern silver logo, the Arbor House. Then I sent her an anonymous note. Just one line: "Your roots were rotten. Now the tree is mine." 3 hours later, her Instagram account posted a vague, overly filtered selfie with a caption about shifting priorities and exciting personal changes. The press release followed a day later. The Magnolia Foundation was transitioning into a digital first model. Lies, she was scrambling, panicking, but I wasn't done, because it wasn't just about owning the building. It was about owning the moment. And that moment would come during her gala, where she still thought she was standing on a throne. She had no clue that the very stage she was planning to walk across had been paid for, decorated, and constructed with my money. Her invitations, printed by a vendor I controlled, her event planner, hired from a list I had curated through Blair's connections, even her caterer, a friend of mine, under a new name, working with a script in hand. Every detail, every inch, every camera angle, mine. It felt like puppetry, and Ellie's, she was the showpiece, dancing on strings she couldn't see. There was a kind of high in that power, not the kind that corrupts, but the kind that clears. For the first time since she humiliated me at that dinner, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like something far more dangerous. I felt like the author of her downfall, and I wasn't writing tragedy. I was writing justice. 3 days before the gala, I visited the Arbor House in person for the first time. I stood under the portico where she used to hold press conferences. The new signage gleamed above my head. Inside, her former office had already been emptied. New lighting, new walls. The gold plaque with her name on the front door, melted down and sent to recycling. I sat at her old desk. I didn't cry, I didn't laugh. I just breathed, deep, steady, ready. The final piece arrived that night, an exclusive legal packet from Andre. Everything was documented now, her tax fraud, her forged signatures, her dummy accounts, the entire web of her deception, ready to be unspooled in a single public strike. It wasn't a matter of if anymore. Only when, and the when was almost here. 3 nights before the gala, I stood beneath the old stone archway of the Arbor House, what used to be the Magnolia Foundation, and stared at the grand chandelier glittering through the window. It was the same one Ellie's had once posted on her Instagram with the caption, "Only elegance lasts forever." I nearly smiled, because now it would be the backdrop for her ruin, letting her host the gala there, inside the very walls she believed still belonged to her legacy, was poetic. Elise had no idea that every detail of her dream night had already been infiltrated, twisted, and threaded with my fingerprints. She was about to perform her most important role, glowing philanthropist, loving wife, untouchable social icon, and she'd be standing on a stage that belonged to me. But this wasn't about revenge anymore, not entirely. This was about reversal, because for once, I wasn't going to be the woman standing outside the velvet ropes. I wasn't going to be told my clothes were modest or my life was quaint. No. This time, Elise would know what it meant to have everything polished and beautiful. Just before it shattered beneath her heels, the day of the event arrived with a sharp golden sun, the kind of light that makes the city feel like a dream. Guests began arriving in waves: celebrities, influencers, high-profile donors, even 2 minor royals. The entire sidewalk outside Arbor House was barricaded for cameras and paparazzi. Photographers yelled names while lights flashed. Red carpet, music, champagne. Inside, the main ballroom was a vision of modern decadence. Gold-trimmed black tablecloths, 6-foot floral installations, champagne towers, and silver-accented menus embossed with the Magnolia Foundation's logo. It was exactly what Elise wanted, down to the monogrammed ice cubes. I watched it all unfold from the private surveillance room upstairs. My team, Blair's tech consultants and Andre's legal contacts, were stationed at every digital control point: lighting, screens, Wi-Fi, sound. The moment she stepped on stage, the moment she smiled for the cameras, that's when it would all flip. Her voice would ring through the room just as the first set of documents began to scroll on the LED walls behind her: account transfers, false charity reports, property deeds. But she didn't know that. She thought tonight was hers. Elise descended the spiral staircase in a floor-length white satin gown with gold embroidery. Custom Dior, I recognized instantly. Her hair was slicked back in a perfect bun, and her lips were painted with a shade called Bloodline. She stopped at the foot of the steps and looked around, owning the room. A crowd applauded. She glowed. "Thank you all for being here," she called out to the guests, her voice floating across crystal and laughter. "Tonight is about generosity, community, and family legacy." I swallowed the bitter memory of her words from that awful dinner. Some people just don't belong at these tables. Oh, but tonight, I belonged at the head. Elise moved through the crowd, hugging the rich, posing with the powerful. I watched from above, unseen, but very much present. Her husband, Mark, whispered something to her as they passed under the glowing lights. She laughed, brushing his shoulder like they were some golden royal couple. She didn't know that the caterers she kept praising were my friends. She didn't know that the flowers spelling out Magnolia had been designed by a florist she once fired for having tattoos, and who now worked under a different name. She didn't know that the event photographer's lens was programmed to record every reaction from every guest, specifically when the documents dropped. She thought she was rising. She was already falling. The program began right on schedule. A violinist performed. A well-known tech CEO gave a speech about investing in women's futures, which felt like a cruel joke knowing what Elise had done with women's donations. Then the MC introduced her. "Please welcome the woman whose vision, passion, and grace built this entire evening, Elise Callahan." Applause thundered, the lights dimmed, the spotlight circled toward the podium. And she walked into it like a queen. Her heels clicked with purpose. Her posture was straight, commanding. She adjusted the mic with practiced ease and smiled at the crowd. "Tonight," she began, "we celebrate the beauty of giving. We celebrate resilience." Click. The screens behind her blinked. Line by line, the images started to scroll. $480,000 diverted to personal offshore account. The Cayman file, forgery sample, signature mismatch from legal trustee documents. Magnolia Foundation internal memo funnel to shell company. The room shifted, at first just murmurs, then gasps, then silence so sharp it made the violin strings earlier feel like screams. Elise turned. Slowly, as if maybe she was dreaming, but she wasn't. Her name was on the documents, her signature, her face, her lies. People stood, phones lifted, cameras clicked again, this time not for fashion, but for evidence. Reporters, invited by me anonymously, began asking questions aloud. "Mrs. Callahan, Do you deny the offshore accounts? What do you say to the whistleblower emails? Did you defraud the foster girls program? Her hands trembled. Her voice faltered. I don't. This is a mistake. Someone hacked. This isn't. She looked to her husband, but Mark had already stepped back. She looked to the crowd, but they were watching, not helping. And then her eyes found the staircase. That's when she saw me. I stood there, one step above, out of reach, dressed in the same simple navy blue cocktail dress she had once ridiculed, hair tied back. No jewels, no need, just me, just truth, and that truth had finally outshone her performance. She opened her mouth, but no words came, and the world watched the ballroom erupted, not in applause, but in gasps, camera clicks, and rapid murmurs. It was the kind of noise that didn't build gradually, but cracked through the room like thunder across polished glass. And at the center of it all stood Elise Callahan, trembling beneath a spotlight that no longer adored her, but exposed her. She looked so small now. Her designer gown suddenly felt like a costume. Her once proud posture drooped under the weight of the screens behind her. Screens that flashed cold, irrefutable truth, line after line. Number after number, her charity's false accounting, forged documents, redirected donations, the shell company registered under a fake name. Every secret she thought was buried had been resurrected and displayed like a gallery of shame. And the cameras were still rolling, broadcasted live. What she hadn't known, and what I had arranged perfectly, was that this event was being live-streamed. It had been pitched by her PR team as a move of transparency to attract younger donors. How ironic! The very platform she intended to use to appear virtuous had become the medium of her undoing. YouTube, Instagram Live, even a syndicated late-night segment were now showing her fall from grace in real time. Millions were watching, and I was one of them. I stood on the upper balcony, out of frame, but close enough to see the tear gathering at the corner of her right eye, not the kind that falls from sorrow, but the kind that stings when pride crumbles. Her face was frozen in a mix of confusion, disbelief, and growing panic. She kept glancing toward the exits like a caged animal searching for a way out, but there was none. Reporters had her surrounded. A woman from Channel 8 pushed forward with a mic. Mrs. Callahan, what do you say to the federal inquiry into the foster girls' trust? A man from the Daily Press shouted, is it true your foundation lost its nonprofit status 2 weeks ago, and you continued fundraising anyway? Another voice, this time from the back, yelled, are you the real Pauper, Elise? That last one made her flinch, and I knew why. Because it echoed the very insult she'd hurled at me just months earlier. That word, Pauper, was supposed to humiliate me, define me, mark me. Instead, it had returned like a boomerang and struck her square in the mouth. And unlike me, she had no grace to fall back on, just mirrors. Cameras and witnesses. Her husband, Mark, took a cautious step away from her, his jaw tightening. He wasn't going to fight for her, not now, not with legal documents projected 10 feet high behind them, bearing her signature and the damning wire transfers. His silence screamed louder than any accusation could, and then, in a surreal twist of timing, the ballroom's grand chandelier, once her favorite talking point on every tour, flickered. That was my signal. From the booth above, Blair's tech team cut the stage lights and turned the room into a sea of low amber hues. The audio paused. Screens shifted one final time. This was the moment we had waited for. In place of the documents, a single video began playing, not one made by reporters, one I had filmed. It was a short, quiet interview, a compilation of 3 women, former staff, donors. One of them, an elderly woman named Greta, spoke directly into the camera. I gave €15,000 to the Magnolia Foundation because Elise promised me it would help girls get out of abusive homes. I later learned my money paid for a private jet to Cannes. I have the receipts. Then another voice, shaky but firm. We were interns. She made us work 70. Our weeks unpaid. We were told we were lucky to learn from her, but we were learning how to lie, how to forge, how to steal without blinking. The video ended with my voice. I hadn't wanted to appear on camera, but I had to, because the audience needed to hear it from the very woman who had been dragged out of a restaurant, called a pauper, humiliated for wearing last season's shoes. The camera zoomed in on my face, soft, sincere, but resolute. I didn't ruin Eli's, I said calmly. She did that all on her own. I just turned on the lights. Gasps echoed once again. A few people clapped. Then more. Then the room broke into a murmur of disbelief and reckoning. Not the kind of applause she was used to, but the kind that acknowledged something real had just happened. Eli's looked paralyzed. And finally, she stepped down from the podium, not gracefully, not in control, but like someone who had just walked through fire barefoot. Her once gleaming heels clicked unevenly on the marble. She whispered something to her assistant, who no longer stood at her side. Even her closest allies had drifted away, pretending to look busy, suddenly nowhere to be found. She stumbled toward the exit. But as she reached the double doors, she was met by a line of people. Not security, lawyers. I had filed a legal motion 2 hours before the event with the help of Andre's firm. Just enough to allow representatives from the Department of Charities Enforcement to issue a cease and desist and a warning of pending criminal investigation. One man in a black suit gently placed an envelope in her hands. "Mrs. Callahan, you've been served." The cameras caught that too, live. She stood frozen, clutching the envelope like it burned. No words, no final speech, just a woman caught in her own spotlight with nothing left to say. She turned slowly and saw me. I stepped down the stairs, finally revealing myself to the full ballroom, and for a moment the whole room held its breath, because it wasn't just that I had exposed her. It was me, the woman she mocked, erased, dismissed, who had the power to end her reign in the same room where she thought she ruled. She opened her mouth, but I beat her to it. I believe I was asked to leave the last time I stood in a room like this. I said softly, smiling, "But tonight I'll take a seat, right at the front." The crowd parted. I walked forward, past the stunned guests, past the TV cameras, past her. She said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Not physically. No, the marble was still polished, the chandeliers still glittered, but the air had shifted. It no longer belonged to Eli's Callahan. Her name had been stripped from the banners. Her face no longer graced the posters. No one dared mention her, not even in whispers. In one evening, her world had crumbled into ash, but I wasn't done. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about redemption, mine, and there was only one way to do it. So I chose the dress, the very same one she had mocked, the one I had worn to her pretentious dinner party months ago, the soft champagne, colored silk with the modest neckline and subtle embroidery, which she'd scoffed at as clearance bin couture. I had cried in that dress. I had been escorted out in that dress. It had soaked in humiliation and memory, but now I wore it like armor. I didn't alter a thing, not the hem, not the buttons. The only difference was how I wore it, with unshakable poise and a silence that echoed louder than applause. It no longer clung to a woman trying to belong. It graced the shoulders of a woman who never needed their validation to begin with. And tonight I was returning to the ballroom as the guest of honor. The event was no longer Eliza's signature gala. It was rebranded under the new leadership of the same foundation she'd abused. The real foundation now, cleaned, audited, and legally revived under an emergency board. I wasn't just the reason for its survival. I was the keynote speaker. People lined the entrance with curiosity and awe. Socialites, journalists, donors. Even celebrities who had once orbited Eli's now looked to me like I was the sun they needed to shine. And then the whispers started. She's here. Is that the same dress? She actually wore that. No malice this time, just stunned admiration, because anyone could wear diamonds and flash cash. But it took a certain kind of courage to walk into a place that once tried to break you, wearing the very same thing you wore when they tried. I stepped onto the carpet, my heels clicking with calm finality. A few camera lights flickered. No shouting, no frenzy, just reverence. Then someone in the crowd said what everyone else was thinking. She made that dress powerful. Inside, the room had been transformed. The banners now bore words like resilience and reform. There were photographs of real beneficiaries of the charity, girls who had received scholarships, therapy, housing, lives touched, not manipulated. This wasn't about branding anymore, it was about people. As I walked to the center table, my assigned seat had a simple name card, Vivian Hart, executive advisor, that's right, Vivian, age 44, once cast out like a nobody. Now, seated exactly where they once said I didn't belong, the speeches began, not long, not flashy, just grateful, heartfelt. A young woman named Alana took the stage to speak about how the new foundation had saved her from an abusive foster situation. Another girl talked about becoming the first in her family to attend college. No one even mentioned Eli's, and yet the memory of her hung in the room, not as a ghost, but as a warning. Her empire had fallen so completely, so publicly, that there was no rebuilding it. Her name had become synonymous with deception, her accounts frozen, her social circles evaporated. I hadn't needed to shout, threaten, or destroy her physically. I had simply shown the world the truth, and then stood back as it swallowed her whole. But I still had one thing left to do. The room dimmed again, not from disaster this time, but anticipation. The host stepped up, and now, a few words from the woman whose bravery, integrity, and incredible patience brought all of us here tonight. Please welcome Vivian Hart. Applause rose like a wave. I stood slowly, not rushed, not performative, just present. As I walked to the podium, the lights softened. I took the mic, looked out over the sea of faces. I didn't clear my throat. Didn't fidget. I wasn't afraid anymore. I began simply, you all know the story. I said, or at least the version that made headlines, about the woman who stole millions and the woman who exposed her. But that's not what I want to talk about tonight. The room hushed. I want to talk about what happened after, about dignity, about grace, about how the same ballroom where I was once dragged out in tears is now a place where survivors are honored. That's not karma. That's justice. People leaned forward. I could see it in their eyes. They weren't just listening, they were feeling every word. I didn't come here to dance on anyone's downfall. I continued. I came here to remind you that kindness is not weakness, that quiet does not mean invisible, that sometimes the person you least expect, the one in the simple dress, the one you laugh at, might just be the one holding all the power. I paused, looked down at my dress, and as for this dress, it's nothing special, just a piece of fabric, but like all of us, it's not about where it came from, it's about what it's been through. The room erupted. Applause, yes, but also emotion. Women stood up, some men too. I saw tears. I saw pride. I saw Eliza's legacy being replaced with something real, something enduring, not glitz, but truth. I ended the speech with a quote Eliza had once used to mock me. Not everyone's meant to sit at this table. She'd laughed when she said it, flicking her wine glass like I was an insect on the wall. Tonight, I said it again, but I changed the ending. Not everyone's meant to sit at this table, because some of us are meant to build it. That brought the house down. Afterward, people came up to thank me, not just for the speech, but for standing up, for not letting injustice slide under the rug just because it came wrapped in wealth. I was no longer the pauper. I was the standard. The ballroom emptied slowly. I stood for a moment taking it in, and then I did something small, but powerful. I took off my heels, walked barefoot across the marble floor. I wanted to feel the ground, to remember what it was like to rise without stepping on anyone else. Before I left, I passed the mirror in the entryway. I stopped, looked at myself, same dress, different woman. I smiled and walked out the door, not as someone who had won, but as someone who had overcome.